Hello everyone and welcome back to This Week in Mythic Plus. Now this week is a difficult week, but let's go over the affixes first. This week we have Raging, which means whenever a non-boss enemy drops down below 30% of their HP, they will become enraged, doing more damage. We also have Necrotic, which means that every time an enemy hits you, it'll apply a stacking debuff which decreases healing by 3%. This debuff does drop after a certain amount of time or whenever combat ends. And lastly we have Tyrannical, which means that all of the bosses have more HP and do more damage. Tanks. This week is going to be very difficult on you. You are going to have to kite, snare, and stun your way out of every situation. Make sure you buff up for this week since it's going to be that much more difficult for you. I suggest going with stamina buffs since it'll increase the amount of HP pool you have. So you want to keep pulls this week to about 6 to 8 mobs since Necrotic will stack up very high and very fast with any pulls that are much bigger. Also, you want to avoid doing any staggered pulls. Whenever you do a trash pull, you want it all to start getting damaged at the exact same time, and that's for the necrotic stacks to kind of go away at the same time, for your snares to affect everyone at the same time, and for raging to be active all at the same time. So to counter necrotic, whenever you're at about 15 or higher stacks, that's when you want to start running away and start kiting. At 15 stacks, you're taking 45% less healing, so it's at that point that you want to land a snare on all of the mobs and start running around kiting all of these mobs. Whenever any pulls that have more than 3 mobs all become enraged at the same time due to falling below 30%, that's when you should start running away from the group. If you only have 1 or 2 mobs that are enraged, it's normally not too bad and you can deal with the damage, but if it's greater than 3, the damage is multiplied that much higher. So if all of the mobs are also below 30% HP, regardless of your necrotic stacks, start kiting that pack. In some dungeons we have mini bosses like in Court of Stars, Vault of the Wardens, and Upper Karazhan, and in these cases with these mini bosses, since they can't be snared or stunned, sort of your last ditch effort to stay alive is to use an HP increasing ability if you have that, since heals won't be working on you, and if you need to kite, try using a ledge since the mobs can't be snared. Remember to keep AoE stuns handy, and a very good way to land a snare on all of your mobs that you pulled is to stun first, run into the middle of the pack, throw out your snare, and then run away from that pack. DPS. Even though we have Tyrannical this week and that applies to bosses and it makes them more difficult, the trash is still going to be your biggest problem when doing Mythic Plus dungeons this week. So you want to spec for cleave and AoE damage in order to kill the trash as quickly as possible. If you have shorter cooldowns, you might want to save them for at about 50% of the pull's HP, and that's so you can burn through the raging part of the pull a lot faster rather than the beginning of the pull, which is not going to have raging. You should also be helping the tank with snaring and stunning all of the mobs. So if the trash is all raging, if it's below 30%, make sure you're applying snares to as much of it as you can, and you should also be stunning on cooldown if you can. And whenever you first pull a pack, after about 10 seconds, your tank is going to probably start kiting because of the necrotic stacks. So after about 10 seconds after the pull began, throw out some snares and help out your tank. Since we do have Tyrannical this week, that means that this week you cannot ignore any boss mechanics. So beware of the boss mechanics, avoid any unnecessary damage since this week it could result in a one-shot. Healers. If you have any talent points that decrease the cooldown of abilities that decrease damage taken, something like Bark Skin, I would highly suggest picking those up this week, since those cooldowns reduce damage taken and bypass necrotic. However, when a tank gets to high stacks of necrotic, all of the healing that you do can be completely cancelled out, but damage reduction abilities will still take effect. Since a tank's necrotic stacks will only go up till the tank decides to go ahead and kite and drop them, try to keep your tank at 100% for as long as possible in the beginning of the pull. So that does mean you will be doing overhealing when the pull starts, but once the stacks start getting higher and your healing does less and less, it'll pay off. As a healer, if you have access to any AoE stuns, knockbacks, or anything to help the tank run away, go ahead and use those when you see your tank starting to kite. It'll help your tank drop necrotic stacks as quickly as possible and get back into the action. If a tank has more than 20 stacks of necrotic and is still actively fighting the group, this is the perfect time to use one of your damage reduction abilities if you have access to them. Now with 20 stacks, the healing that you're doing is reduced by 60%, so healing won't be that effective, so use some of these cooldowns and throw out a little bit of healing whenever you can. But if your tank ever gets to more than 33 stacks of necrotic debuff, your healings will do 0% healing, so at that point you should be helping out with snares, stuns, and even damage if you can until the necrotic stacks fall off. Overall this week, in any pull that you get more than 15 stacks of necrotic, that's when you should start kiting that pull. Everyone should keep their stuns and snares handy in order to help out the tank. Damage reduction abilities are going to be really good since they bypass necrotic and they help your tank stay in the action a little bit longer. And Tyrannical means that you can't ignore the boss mechanics this week, so be very aware of boss mechanics and avoid all that damage. And when you have a complete pull that is all raging, you should be stunning and snaring so that the tank doesn't have to run back in there and reapply the snare, because 6 to 10 mobs all swinging with raging can guarantee kill a tank. Overall this week, the difficulty ranges from 6 to 8 out of 10 depending on what dungeon you're running and what class you are. Dungeons like Vault of the Warden and Court of Stars, which have mobs that cannot be snared and stunned, are going to be more difficult this week. As well as if you are a tank with low mobility like a DK, you're going to have a harder time this week running away and kiting things. So be careful with what dungeons you pick this week. It is completely possible to do a plus 15, but do not get frustrated if you do not meet it in time. Stick with the group, try to get your plus 15 done for the week, even if it takes a little bit longer, but this week is a difficult one. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, good luck out there.